we are in a very difficult situation because in the EU, we believe that we are the center of the world. It was true in the past and even until recently, but the world has completely changed. And therefore, we should not forget what is occurring in the world. We will see in this presentation that the rest of the world is doing something very different of what we are claiming to do in Europe, because energy is life, is work, and is quality of life. Without energy, there is no life, no work, and no quality of life. This is a major change in developing countries. And second thing, it's clear that a number of countries, and not only the BRICS, want to reverse the order that we had since 1945. And we should pay attention to what is occurring in not only in China, Russia, and India, but also in the number of countries, about 15 countries that want to join the BRICS. So it's important to look at the world situation, at the geopolitical situation when you deal with energy and climate change, of course. So the first point that I would like to show you is that there is no modern life possible without energy, and it's why we should have cheap and abundant energy, because there will be more people in the world that need to have a good quality of life. In this graph, you will see two different set of numbers, but according to the energy per capita, the dot represents the United Nations countries of the world, and on the left you see the life expectancy, and on the right the Human Development Index is a benchmark of the United Nations to indicate what is the quality of life in one country. And you see that if there is no or little energy use, you have a life expectancy which is low and a low quality of life. And as soon as you increase the demand of energy, the consumption of energy, you improve a lot your quality of life, and you improve also your life expectancy. That means that people do not use enough energy, have a short life. Pay attention that wasting energy is not interesting, because those are the countries in the Gulf, Persian Gulf, and here also, and you see that they are not improving their quality of life or their life expectancy. So we should not be surprised that the world energy consumption is growing linearly, as you can see here, with a few exceptions when there are crises. Here we have the crisis of 1973, 50 years ago, oil shock 50 years ago, the oil shock of 1978. If you want to reduce the energy consumption in the world, the only solution for time being is really to have crisis, which of course we do not want to have it. And you can see that there is not one single fuel which has been disappearing. They are just adding to the other. Coal is increasing, oil is increasing, gas is increasing, hydro is increasing, and renewables are increasing also. The main part now is Asia. That means mainly China, India, or a number of other countries. And the EU represents 10% and America 20%. I've made some calculations to see what could be the future of the demand of energy. And the population will increase as we have more energy per capita, as we have seen in the first graph. Most of the countries, like Africa and Asia, have to increase their energy consumption per capita. If you multiply the energy per capita by the increase of the world population, you have, of course, an increase of the demand of energy. So compared to what you are repeating that we are going to limit energy consumption, I believe that this is really misleading. The only possibility with a growing population, with a better quality of life for more people, the only possibility is to have more energy. At the beginning, in 1955, the six founders of the EU met in Messina, and they adopt the Messina Resolution in June 55. There is no future for the European Community or European Union, or for Africa, or for India, without cheap and abundant energy. Today, nuclear energy is not the main topic of my talk, but I cannot avoid to mention that. The nuclear energy is the most important source to generate electricity in the EU. 1/4 of the electricity generated in the EU 27, without UK, is nuclear energy. Gas is 20%, wind 14%, and you see that we cannot escape in saying that we do not want to supply nuclear energy, because it's so important in Europe. 1/4. What is the EU policy today? As you can see on this map slide presented by the European Commission after the war in Ukraine, presenting the project called Repower EU in May last year, with a budget of 300 billion, a huge amount of money, to do what? More energy efficiency, more hydrogen. I will come back to that. Of course, not importing gas from Russia. That means finding gas in other parts of the world. More wind and more solar. But indeed, we are doing that since so many years. There is nothing new in this. It's just repeating and repeating that we should do more. But the more strange thing is that the Commission said that we should import electricity and even hydrogen from Ukraine. This is very astonishing. How is it possible that we pretend to import electricity in a state which is at war, where there is no more nuclear power plant in full operation? Russia have destroyed them, and hydrogen is not existing in Ukraine, not existing, not in Europe neither, but certainly not in Ukraine. So it's very strange. But there is something even more strange, that the Commission have not mentioned at all nuclear energy in this strategy. And yet we have a treaty. Euratom Treaty is in force. And it's obliging the Commission to promote nuclear energy. So the problem now in Brussels is that they have only one thing in mind, is dismantling nuclear and replacing with wind energy. Why is it possible that this big shift? Well, the big shift is explained in this slide. This man here was the commissioner for the Green Deal. He resigned to run for prime minister in Netherlands, Mr. Timmermans. He resigned a few weeks ago. But this man here is head of cabinet, is Diederik Samson. Who is Diederik Samson? He is speaking here in the parliament with the former president of the parliament, Jerzy Buzek. Who is Diederik Samson? A former activist of Greenpeace. And nobody complained about that. So the policy of the Green Deal of the EU attacking nuclear has been developed by a guy which was working for Greenpeace. But France have reacted a little bit late, and now they insist that we should not forbidden the use of nuclear energy. And they organize a meeting in Paris with 11 countries of the EU, and including UK, saying that we should have a renaissance for Euratom. It's why I am calling that a Euratom 2.0, because indeed it's a new start for nuclear energy. Why is a new start? Because France has lost the war the race, sorry, for nuclear energy. They make a huge mistake saying that they want to reduce nuclear share in France, and then they try to sell their nuclear know-how in other countries. And he went to Poland to convince the Polish to buy French nuclear power plants, but the Polish bought Westinghouse, American technology. Of course, if you make a strategic mistake and you claim everywhere that you want to reduce your share because nuclear is not the right solution, how do you expect to sell nuclear power plant in other countries? That means that because of this huge mistake of the EU, nuclear power plant in the world will be Russian, Chinese, American, maybe Canadian, and maybe Korean, but certainly Chinese, Russian, and American. And forget about the EU, who was the leader in the past. So we have a Green Deal, which is indeed focusing only, practically only, on renewable energy, and particularly on wind and solar energy, but also on hydrogen, as we will see in a minute. So what is the situation on renewable energy in the EU? You see that it's growing. Of course, it's growing with all the public support that we give to the renewable energy is growing quite a lot. So you see here, 20 years ago, renewable energy were mainly wood and hydro. And today, hydro is stable because we didn't build the new capacities. But you see the huge development of wood that we call biomass. Why? Because it is the cheapest way to produce renewable energy. All the other forms of energy are more expensive. It's why, despite wind is growing, it's not displacing wood. And you see that solar panels are growing, but they are not very lot. That means that globally, you see that wind and solar that everybody mentioned as the solution represents only 1/5 of the renewable energy. And more than 2/3, if you count all the bio type of energy, more than 2/3 are bio. That means that we are a little bit misleaded when we say more renewable. More renewable of what? Which one? Clearly, it will not be solar. Why? Because if you look at this graph, this is what we had until now as increase of renewable energy in the final demand. And 2 weeks ago, the EU have agreed to reach 42.5. We are a little bit at 22, and they would like to reach 22.5. Pay attention to the 0.5. I don't know how they calculate the 0.5, but this is the target, 42.5. 42.5 is this, here. And you have here the 27 countries. Ireland is here. You see that you have a long way to go to the target. Only Sweden, Finland, Latvia, the Nordic countries reach it already. All the others have to make a big effort to reach here in 7 years. That means that it's really impossible because this has been reached in 50 years. But there is another thing. Here in this graph, I plot in red the wind and solar energy in the total primary energy consumption. And Ireland is here, you see, very small. That means that if you look, we are here in average about around 15%. But we need to reach 42%, but without the green part, because the green part is hydro and wood. And hydro and wood are not promoted by the EU anymore. That means that only the red part should increase. So how can you imagine that the red will become the double of the green in 7 years? That's really impossible. Why it is so difficult? Because wind and solar are intermittent. I plot here the electricity production from a solar power plant in Sicily. And you see that, for example, in December, they had 15 hours, 45 minutes without any production. So solution cannot be solar panel, because you will not have electricity for a long period. And here is the same thing with a wind plant in the south of Italy. And you see that in March, the wind is blowing and then disappearing in blue. In December, it's quite erratic with long period of nothing. And here in the green part is September, you see practically no production, and even 22 hours, 45 minutes without any production. So you cannot rely to run a country, an industry, with this type of production. Of course, this is for a few days. What we need to look is the average over years. And the average of your years, according to the data of Eurostat, are 23% of the time for wind and 11% of the time for solar. This is named load factor. It's a little bit more complicated, but I have no time to explain the details. But practically, you should remember that a wind plant produces nearly during 1/4 of the time, and the solar panel during 10% of the time. And a colleague sent me this information that in September, in United Kingdom, during the first 6 days, they had only a load factor of 10%, and on 8th of September, it was 1.4%. How can you expect that a country will develop with this type of energy? That means that if you want to build more wind and solar panel, you need to build something which is a backup that will operate 3/4 of the time for wind machine and 90% of the time for the solar panel. This is in operation. This is functioning in the EU. But what is the consequence of this reality? Is that the more you produce electricity from wind and solar, the more the people have to pay the high price of electricity. The champion is Denmark. Germany, Ireland, you are not bad here. You see, you have expensive electricity because you produce too much intermittent and renewable energy. And here you have the country which do not want, will not follow the EU in developing renewable energy intermittent. Poland, Hungary, Romania, and so on. There is another problem. A windmill cannot produce a windmill. This is a picture that I took at the Garzweiler lignite mine in Germany, near Aachen. And you see the lignite mine, open cast mine with windmill, because I found this interesting to show that, yes, if you want to have a windmill, you need mines. Why? Because a windmill requests 900 tons of steel and 200 and 500 tons of concrete. And steel and concrete are produced with fossil fuel. It is impossible to build windmill and even solar panel without the use of fossil fuel. Of course, you can hide that, saying that the fossil fuel will be produced in other countries, in China in particular. But the reality is that globally, the more wind you want to build, the more you will need fossil fuel, and therefore CO2 emissions. And what about this reality of wind electricity? Well, it's easy to talk about electricity, but we need to look at the global demand of energy. That means including transport and thermal use. And if you do that, you realize that oil is the most important energy in Europe, more than 1/3, 35%, and wind and solar represent 3%. All this money that we have spent, more than 1,000 billions since 2000, just to reach 3%. And they want to reach 100% by the year 2050. I wonder how is it possible to be so imaginative. If you look at the world level, you have the same thing with much more money spent, $3.8 trillion, but again 3%. Wind and solar globally represent 3%. The only difference between the EU and the rest of the world is that they use much more coal, as you can see here. Nearly 27, between 1/4 and 1/3 of the energy use in the world is coal. We will come back to that later on. So you see that renewables are not really a solution. It's why the Commission tried to invent another solution, hydrogen. The problem is that the idea to produce hydrogen with wind energy is old. It is now 1 century in a few months, because it has been proposed for the first time in Cambridge by John Haldane, the 4th of February 1923. When I joined the Commission in 1982, we were working on hydrogen. And you see here the proceeding of the conferences. And at that time, we were saying that hydrogen is a vector or a carrier, not an energy. And here you see the colleagues, older than me, the senior colleagues. I was a junior official. Those were the senior colleagues with whom I was working on hydrogen. The idea was to produce hydrogen because we were convinced that it's possible to produce hydrogen with something that I will show you in 2 slides. There are 2 sources of hydrogen in the world: hydrocarbons and water. Nothing else. You need to transform hydrocarbon or water. The problem is that chemistry is not following the wishful thinking of politicians. To break down the molecule of methane to produce hydrogen requires 7 times less energy than to break down the water molecule. That means that if you are in an EU fortress, you can do what you want. But you are in a global world, nobody will do that because it's 7 times more expensive. 7 times, not 110%, no, 700%. It's why today, nearly all the hydrogen produced for the chemical industry, 130 million tons per year, is produced from methane, particularly in Russia, because they have cheap gas and they produce a lot of ammonia to prepare the fertilizer. So I told you that the Commission worked on that, and you have here the father of the hydrogen development, Mr. Cesare Marchetti, a bright physician. He worked on that in 1960, and he understood that it's ridiculous to believe to make water electrolysis to produce massive quantity of hydrogen. And what he was saying is that we need new generation of nuclear, what we call today generation 4. At that time, it was not this name. But you see, the idea is to reach 700 degrees C and to have a chemical dissociation of water, not electrolysis. Why the Commission scientists have developed this research and then to forget about nuclear energy and to dream to produce hydrogen with wind? It's a nonsense. It's why I wrote a book, The Hydrogen Illusion, explaining the history and the chemical aspect of this production. But once that you have hydrogen, are you really burning it? It's so stupid to burn hydrogen. Hydrogen is a precious molecule, is the base of chemistry, is the base of the fertilizer production to give food to people. And you want to burn such a precious molecule? Nobody will do that. Nobody will burn hydrogen for energy purpose. It's just a nonsense. It will not be realized. Maybe we will produce a little bit of hydrogen that will be used in the chemical industry, maybe, but certainly not to run the energy system. So why are we so enthusiastic and the rest of the world is doing the opposite? Because this is the sad reality. The world is going in another direction. Just look at this comparison. The energy increase, the energy consumption increased during the last 10 years for the BRICS countries and for the EU. And you see that in the EU, the only thing which have increased is the wind and solar here. The rest have decreased. In the BRICS, wind and solar have increased also. But all the other energies have increased also. To the point that wind and solar represent 1/5 of the increase. So contrary to what people are saying, the gap between wind and solar and fossil fuel is increasing. The gap is increasing between what the policy in the EU is saying and what the world is doing. The consequence is here for the CO2 emission. Only the BRICS emission here have emitted more than 2,000 million tons of CO2, when the the EU have reduced it by 500. So we are the only one in EU believing that wind and solar will replace everything. To the point that in Brussels, the most important energy, oil, 35%, is ignored completely. There is not one word about oil in the EU policy, and yet you see that the world reserves are increasing because the world needs energy. The paradox is that even the EU needs energy. If we do not, oil. If we do not import oil from Russia, we need to import it from something else, somebody else. And look at this very strange scene in Sharm el-Sheikh in the COP27. Countries were meeting to say that we need to reduce the CO2 emission. And the French president, Mr. Macron, met in the corridor Mr. Maduro, Nicolas Maduro, president of Venezuela, and he told him, we need to speak because the continent has changed. We cannot import oil from Russia, and we need you. You see, that's very strange that at the same moment, or the EU continue to say that we don't need oil and gas. You see, even in May 22, during the beginning of the war nearly, Mrs. von der Leyen said in Davos that we do not need oil and gas. How is it possible to say that? You have seen the importance of oil and gas in the previous slide. But that's not all. The 15th of May in the European Parliament, in a meeting on degrowth, you see here, behind growth, so that means stopping the growth in the EU, she clearly say a growth model centered on fossil fuel is simply obsolete. Dear colleagues, for the Commission, oil is obsolete. We do not need it. Everything will be done with wind and solar panel. And you see, of course, the president of the parliament, the president of the Green Group, very happy that she said that we need to stop growth, not only growth in economy, but also growth in population. which is not the aim of the Commission to address this question. Similarly, we have an increase of the demand of gas because there is, I believe, a dash for the demand of gas. Gas is abundant in the world. It's available in all continents. Gas is clean because it's used in all kitchens. When you go to the restaurant, the food has been prepared burning gas because it's clean. I'm not talking about CO2. I'm talking about pollution, air pollution. Gas is clean. Gas is cheap. Yes, don't be afraid with what happens last year. We can discuss that later on in the discussion, but gas is cheap. And you can do everything with gas. You can produce electricity. You can heat your home. You can run industry. You can produce chemical. And you can run your cars. In Iran, most of the cars are operating with gas, natural gas. And I still believe that there is no geopolitics game in gas, even after the war in Ukraine. If you want, we can discuss that later on. And I want just to show you a few examples of the huge development of gas project in the world. This is in Qatar, a new extension of the Raf Lafan plan in Qatar, built with a collaboration with ExxonMobil. You see a huge development. They want to pass from 77 million tons per year to 126 million per year. Why? 126. Why? Because the world needs gas. We will not escape from that. China bought last year, signed a contract for 27 years of gas supply from Iran. And last week, Total signed also, French Total Energy, you see, 11th of October. Last week, they signed also a contract for 27 years of supply. Colleagues, gas will flow everywhere to the point that Qatar Energy is investing $10 billion in Texas to export shale gas. You imagine Qatar investing to export American gas. They want to be the leader in gas export. They will export gas from Qatar, and they will export gas from Texas. Yes, there is a lot of gas in America. And you see that since 2015, the huge increase of the demand of gas, of export of gas, sorry. And where this gas is going? Well, everywhere in Asia, but mainly in Europe. You see, and the number are increasing because I took this from September 22, from the US administration. No, it's about 45% of the gas, which is flowing to Europe, mainly to France, but not only, and also to Germany. No. So it's very strange that we want to say that people should not use gas and there is no future for gas, when indeed we are preparing to import more gas than in the past. And where this gas is flowing, it could pass by the Panama Canal and go to Asia, or it can go to the Atlantic to Europe. It depends on what? The price. Is the price which will say where the gas will go. So if we are not able enough to diversify the market and to continue to fight to have our own gas in Europe, we will need to pay a lot because the demand in India and China, even Pakistan, will not be reduced. And I like this picture showing the CEO here, Mr. Descalzi, of Eni. Eni is one of the major gas company in the world. Very impressive technology developer. Eni belonged to the Italian government, or at least the majority belong to the Italian, to Italy. So Italy, indeed, is investing, as you see, 7.7 billion in Egypt to produce oil and gas. Isn't it very strange that the same government come in Europe, in Strasbourg and Brussels, and say that we need to reduce the CO2 emissions when we invest so much in fossil fuel? This slide on the left, picture on the left, show you the 580 methane carrier transporting methane. And as you see on the right, the transport gas by liquid gas have reached the level of the gas transport by pipe. Why? Because it gives you flexibility. Even before the war in Ukraine, people knew, and you see the big increase, that if you have a link between a supplier and a client, you are linked. And you are obliged to buy the gas there. If you can transport gas by boat, you are free. It will be more expensive, but there is no price for freedom. It's why you see that the gas market has completely changed, and it will continue, and nobody will build new long pipeline to transport gas. It was already decided before the war in Ukraine, but of course more after the war in Ukraine. Pay attention that here not one single boat was directed to Germany, because the German government didn't want to have a safety valve. An LNG plant is a safety valve because you can import from different countries, you can store the gas as liquid form. The German didn't want it for various reasons we can discuss in the later on, but it's a strategic mistake that has cost billions to all Europeans. Because if Germany had at least one large terminal, gas terminal, they would have been able to limit the increase of the cost of gas in Europe, and therefore to limit the cost of electricity that we had all to pay. Colleagues, we have paid a lot of electricity for the electricity last year because Germany didn't want to have one gas terminal, one LNG terminal. Just one slide on coal. You see that here on the right, the impressive increase of the coal consumption in China. And China used more than 50% of the coal of the world. Don't be misled. China will not be able to develop, to bring food and work to the population without cheap and abundant coal. If somebody tell you, yes, but they are developing windmill and solar panel, of course, it's marginal to compare to coal. To the point that last year, we have reached 8 billion, gigaton, 8 gigaton of coal. It's impressive. And coal will continue to be used. What will happen if we use more coal? The reality of the CO2 impact in the world. The reality of the CO2 impact in the world is that the EU just represents 8% of the CO2 emissions. And you see Ireland is really very small, 0.1% of the CO2 world emission. And you see China represent 31%. And India, which is only 7%, will explode the demand of coal in order to provide electricity to the population, which is now the first one on this planet. No, it's clear that the EU reduction here is irrelevant. Look at this. The EU having decreased its own CO2 emissions for various reasons, mainly because the former socialist country in the east part of Europe have entered into an economy of market. That means that you need to be efficient, and to be efficient, you need to reduce your energy consumption. And you see that we have been able to reduce the CO2 emission by 23% since the Rio conference. But the rest of the world is increasing the CO2 emission by 61%. And each time that there is a crisis, subprime, and here the COVID, of course you reduce the CO2 emission. But this is not a solution. And look at the number here. We are not going to detail the number, but you see that they are increasing everywhere, except in USA, which is nearly stable, and the EU, which is decreasing. We are the only one paying attention to the CO2 emission, to the point that be prepared for another failure of COP. It will be the 28th, with the exception of COP3 in Kyoto and COP21 in Paris. They had 28 minus 2, 26 failure. And I believe it will be the same this year. Furthermore, this year it will be in Emirates, and Emirates do not accept the pressure of European legislator, because they say you are trying to dictate the global south, that means all the developing countries and the BRICS in particular, what you would like us to do. We will not follow you anymore. Very tough statement. And the more surprising is what India have said recently. If you want to be serious about CO2, you should stop dealing with countries, but dealing with people. And what is relevant is not the CO2 emission of a country, but is the CO2 per inhabitant. With this proposal, they will kill completely the COP. Because, of course, the culprit will appear immediately, the OECD countries, and the EU in particular. And India will show the numbers, say, I will not follow you. I need to develop. I will show you the last slide now, before the conclusion. I cannot refrain to show this picture. You understand what it is in Israel. Why this massacre? Why this incredible attack? Because the Abraham Agreement were developing. We just mentioned Emirates. Emirates was ready to invest 48 billion in Israel to produce gas. And Saudi Arabia was ready to develop good relation with Israel. And of course, Iran cannot accept that. That is the background of this tragedy. Energy is in the background of this tragedy. Let's conclude. It is utopian to believe that we will reach 42.5% of renewable energy in developing only wind and solar energy. It's even ridiculous. Second thing, it's useless to reduce the CO2 emission in Europe, because the world will continue to increase the consumption of fossil fuel, cheap and abundant energy. This will destroy the EU economy, starting with the automotive industry and following by the chemical industry. This will destroy the welfare of Europeans, because if we do not have industry, we will not survive only selling wine and tourism. We need industry in Europe. And the welfare of Europe depends on people working. If we continue to mislead people with green energy, we will provide poverty in Europe. And last point is unethical. What we are doing is unethical because we claim that Africa should follow us with renewable energy. The EU is financing only wind and solar panel in Africa. And it is not a solution for us. You can imagine for them. So thankfully, African countries start to react. They start to react in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. And they say, we will not follow you. And this year it will be even tougher. EU will be marginalized because people need cheap and abundant energy. So thank you very much. I want just to present two books. The one on the right I mentioned already is the Hydrogen Illusion. And on the left, this is my last book.
Il est 21h.
The Organized Destruction of EU Competitiveness. I explain in this book all the good things that the EU have done during 60 years. We have made a tremendous job to deliver good quality of life to the citizen in Europe. Europe has been prosperous thanks to the work of the EU, and particularly the Commission, my former employer. But those last 5 years, we have destroyed all the benefits that we have created. I explained that in the book, all the good things and the sad situation of today. I leave you also my email address if you want to contact me. I am always answering to questions. Thank you very much for your attention.